exercise today is to paint a moment, an area of that table, not necessarily in the style of Cézanne, but certainly channeling the genre, the subject of still life, and maybe taking a few little lessons of how do you take on such a large setup and compact that into a picture. Now this follows on some of the exercises we've looked at earlier at the start of the week when we were talking about how to create a strong composition and a strong design. So all of that is going to very much be encompassed in this, and you'll see very quickly how it fits some of those guidelines, some of those so-called rules that we were discussing. And also in terms of colour mixing, I'm going to try and keep this relatively representational, so I'm going to sort of steal the colours that I see in the scene, but I may add a few little colourful twists here, there and everywhere. So how do you start and begin a painting like this when there is just so much on display? And it is, of course, that magic word that I've been using quite a few times, a lot of the demonstrations I've been doing, and that is simplification. Okay, you have to simplify. You have to edit and choose which bits of the scene you're going to paint, but in many ways it's more important to choose which bits you are not going to paint. Remember, if there's 12 people in a room and we're all talking loudly at the same time, nobody is heard. You have to sort of choose 1, 2, maybe 3 characters to take centre stage. They're all going to be your focal points, they're going to be the stars of your painting, and then the others are going to be sort of the extras in your film, the extras in the background. They're going to give the scene a great sense of context, but they are not going to be loud enough to take away attention from your main Hollywood stars and Hollywood components of the scene. Now, one of the first things that I do when I start to look at this and see is to think, well, which bits am I going to paint, and indeed which format is my canvas going to take? Is it going to take a landscape format, or indeed it could go in a portrait format? If it's going to go in a landscape format, it inevitably invites you to paint more horizontally, so going left to right. So that's going to be really quite useful if you want to sort of get a lovely sense of moving from left to right or right to left, that lovely kind of panoramic perspective. However, if you want to get maybe something of height going from the top to the bottom, whether it's the flowers or some of the items going down, maybe cascading some of the drapery down the table, having your canvas in a portrait format would describe that slightly better. Now, there is no right or wrong, you just have to choose the one that you think would work best for that area that you happen to be in front of. So that's the very first thing that you need to decide. So for me, I'm going to sort of paint this lovely sweep where it goes from the top of this beautiful pot down to this, and this lovely fabric and a few little pieces of fruit there. So I'm just going to sort of paint this sort of corner moment. I'm not going to focus too much, if at all, on the flowers or anything else in the background. I'm going to pick up the colours, and even the colours of the background and the beautiful tapestry in the building. I will pick that up, and that will maybe be suggested in the background, but they'll be completely out of focus, and those colours are just going to echo quite beautifully back into the still life setup. So before I've even painted, there needs to be a lot of this, a lot of thinking, just processing and a few ideas. If you're unsure, excuse me, one of the best things you can do was the very first exercise we did at the chateau when we were walking around the gardens and the grounds, and that was sketching. Draw out a thumbnail, draw out 2, 3, 4. Try it on a few times, very, very small scale, just to give you an idea of what to expect. That's particularly good if you're just a little bit unsure, or you have 1 or 2 options and you just don't know which one to commit to. Sketch out first, and inevitably one will just feel slightly stronger. You'll feel slightly more sure and confident with one over the other. That's one of a really, really strong and good idea to do. I'm going to need to then go straight into the painting, and I want to show you kind of how you build this up. Now, Cézanne worked in a variety of ways. Okay, he was painting slightly differently, I suppose, to sort of Monet and Pissarro and Sisley that we've been looking at thus far. He was very famous and notorious for working on a white canvas. He didn't tone it. Okay, he worked straight onto the white canvas, and quite often he went into painting the fruit or the planes of the landscape pretty much straight away. When I say the planes, I mean those sort of strong brush strokes. Now, of course, to go into that, you have to have a really good, solid understanding of where things are going to land. You know, is the apple going to go there or there or there or there before you paint it? Now, if you feel really confident in your draftsmanship and ability in getting things in proportion, go and start painting the colour of the fruit and the colour of the items straight away. If, however, you want a little bit more guideline to put some sense of drawing and draftsmanship to help you place the colours, that would be a really, really good suggestion and idea to do. And I'm going to do that for you, just to help you visualise what I am seeing in my mind, okay? Have a sort of a bit of an idea in my head of what I'd like to capture. So I'm going to do a rough drawing, not with a pencil or charcoal, but I'm going to draw with the brush. And I'm just going to suggest a few of those moments, a few of those sort of key characters in the scene, and just to show you how I'm composing the scene to fit that rule of thirds and the leading edges and the strong shapes as well. So you're going to use a relatively decent sized brush. I've got a size 4 and a size 2. And I've got my solvent, so I'm using the paint thinner for this, just to keep the paint nice and thin. And the colour that I'm going to use is going to be a relatively light pale colour. Okay, remember we always want light to begin with because we don't want that those lines or anything underneath to compromise the setup. So I'm going to start off, I'll start off with I'm going to start off with a number 4, and I'm going to put a little bit of the solvent on my brush. I'm using the paint thinner, and I'm going to start off with a kind of a yellowy sort of colour. Okay, so yellow in itself is quite a light value, it's quite pale. You could use a pale blue or a pale anything, but keep it nice and pale. You can add white if you need to, but I'm going to try and keep the transparency of the medium, because this yellow by Michael Harding is beautifully transparent as it is. And I just wanted to get an idea of where the character is. So you notice I'm starting to sweep my hand, okay? This is the direction. I kind of want there to be a strong sort of sweep and direction going through the painting like that, okay? That's almost like the path that we were talking about, okay? That's what we call a leading line, okay? A line that just takes you through the painting. There's this wonderful sense of rhythm and cascade. So I've got my main sort of characters, and it's very tempting to sort of draw this big blue greeny pot sort of like that and have that very much a sort of strong character, but it's a really, really large feature which I don't want to dominate the picture too much. So what I'm actually going to do is completely crop it off a little bit, and I'm going to sort of only have sort of half of it. I'm going to push it right off. So one of the best things that we can do for still lives is don't have everything always sitting smack bang in the middle of the painting. It's quite nice to cut it off, okay, to have things cropped off and disappeared. It kind of gives the painting a much more sort of intimate moment that we're sort of looking in. So the base of this big pot is going to sort of be around about there. So I've cut the whole top of it completely off. Okay, so that strong shape is going to be right at the top with the fabric going there. And that kind of hits this line that's taking it all the way and up through the seam. Then we start having these shapes of fabric, and we start getting to our lovely, interesting moment down here where we have some of our fruit. Now what I'm not doing is I'm not going to draw every single individual fruit. I've got a cluster of apples, a lemon, and a pear, and a peach as well. They're all sort of stacked on top of each other. Now what I'm not going to do is draw every single one individually. What I'm looking at those cluster of fruits, I'm going to group them as a shape. Okay, remember, paint shapes, not things. And I'm not even going to paint them as individual shapes. I'm going to cluster them together, and they're going to be one large mass shape, which to my eye looks a little bit like this. It starts up there, connects up to an apple, which is about sort of here, and then it comes down. In fact, that little peach is completely off, so I'm going to allow that to disappear, and that disappears there. So we have that sort of shape that's taking place there, and that comprises of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and a half different fruit in there. Okay, so I have my big dominating shape up here. I've got this shape of the fruit there. Let's continue on, and then we have this beautiful pot that's just sort of cascading. I'm putting up my paintbrush as a horizontal line as it comes and sits all the way down, and I can see that it situates just about this point of this larger pot to the right of it. Let me just check that again, just to make sure that those angles yet started about there. So that lovely bulbous quality is quite close to the large character, not too close. So we've got this shape that's and I'm always a little bit unsure about drawing circles. So what I like to try and do is just sort of line it off. So I'll produce that very round, spherical quality and sort of produce it in a series of straight lines. You see it's sort of made up with those scruffy lines. And what's wonderful is your eye takes those straight lines and turns it into a round circle. Even though I'm not drawing a round circle, your sort of brain is filling in all the parts for me. We have this lovely undulation of fabric. Now I love these apples which are taking place here. I think these are really gorgeous characters that are right by here. Got a shape there shapes. 1, 2, 3. So there's that shape that's taking place there. I've made them slightly bigger, just a little bit bigger, just so it starts to inhabit this space. So if you feel a fruit could just do with moving an inch to the left or the right, or making it a little bit bigger or smaller, just to fit your scene that little bit better, as long as it doesn't compromise the overall perspective, you have complete permission and artistic freedom to do so. Our job is to make as strong, engaging paintings as possible, so that's a good little trick. I love this angle line of the fabric, so the way that this fabric is just falling down here and cascading off the table. Have you noticed that that angle is really important to accentuate that leading line? Yeah, it's taking you through the picture. It's also really nice, it's going to give me a good value change. So of course the fabric is going to be light, so therefore the table under here is going to be dark. So I've got the opposite. So always sort of in one back part of my mind, thinking about what the opposites are going to be. And then the fabric starts to cascade over here. That's the lovely kind of tablecloth with a pattern on it. That's disappearing. I've got a little sense of some fruit which is going to take place over here and here. And then what I haven't got, I've got an available gap, which is about, let me just look at that sort of there. I've sort of got an available space here, which I could either leave white, but I think that's a little bit of a shame. I'd like to stick something. At the moment, my picture finishes, I say, about here, and I'm missing these cherries, and the cherries are very paintable, as well as absolutely delicious. So I'm going to take those cherries, which are off my composition. In my painting, they probably feature out here, and I'm just going to move them over, and we're going to finish off my picture with a couple of little cherries over there, okay? So this is my vision and the design and the concept for the picture, okay? Very simple structural shapes. These could be trees, or a building, or a cloud, couldn't they? That's sort of how vague it is for the moment. So once we've done this, I want to then start building in a little sense of value. I want to start getting a sense of the lightest bits and indeed some of the darkest bits. Now, the one thing I'm going to do for the moment is I'm going to try and keep my colours relatively transparent. Okay, I want to keep them just slightly on the transparent side, not opaque colours. So we're looking at things like your alizarin crimson, your ultramarine blue, your viridian green. Transparent colours tend to be the oiliest, okay? So what you don't really want to work with is white, certainly the titanium white, yellow ochre, for example, cobalt is sort of in the middle. So I'd leave those colours for the moment and try and stick to your more transparent ones to begin with, just to give you a little bit of a tonal design. So I'm going to take this and tone it up a little bit. I want to emphasise, this isn't how Cézanne worked, this bit, but I think this is a really useful way for us to sort of anchor in and get our painting in a little stronger from a tone perspective. So I'm going to take a little bit of my alizarin crimson, a little bit of the yellow. So that's going to make a nice sort of warm, gingery orange colour, which is quite nice. And I'm going to start just very loosely putting in some of these. I'm going to jump up to a big brush, okay, because I was just doing that with a small brush, which is silly, it's a waste of time. So let's go bigger. And I'm still going to keep the paint on the thin side, okay, so I'm still going to keep it relatively thin with the solvent, okay. We're just going to use solvent today, just because it's going to move around quite thin, quite watery to begin with. I'm not too worried about the drying process for this. So we have that dark section there. I'm also going to get something of the shape of that big dominating pot that's in the top right. Now I'm not overly worried about getting the specific colour. In fact, the colour I'm putting on is this sort of dirty, brownish purple colour. And I made that with the crimson and a little bit of the ultramarine blue. It's still got a bit of yellow in essentially. But it's just, I'm not focusing on the colour, I'm just focusing on just the value side, the value shapes. Now, in order to help me see in value, what's the one thing that I'm doing that helps me see the value of the subject? Squinting down, yeah. So I'm reducing my ability to see. Okay, the less you see, the easier it will be. And that's really also great for simplifying where those shapes are, as well as seeing our values as well. So we have that structural shape going there. Let's just use some of this darker value under our backdrop of cloth. And I can give a hint now. Let's just hint at some of these characters, some of the main characters that are taking place. So I love this cluster of fruits down here. So I have a plum, a sort of pear sort of shape, an apple-y sort of shape. There's another apple there, and there's an apple sitting on top. Have you noticed how I'm drawing these very spherical things? Okay, not particularly overly round, but just a series of those straight lines. Okay, so that's just giving it that tiny bit more clarity and structure. I can now put some just angled lines of some of the fabric up there. This is just all going to be quite plain fabric. I don't want to do too much. I'm going to hint at a pattern, but it is going to be a hint. The pattern that's on the tablecloth that's scrunched up is lovely, but if I was to put too much emphasis on that in the painting, for the viewer it's going to be quite confusing as which is reality, which is actual fruit, and which is a print of fruit or whatever it may be. So when it comes to that, we're going to treat it very vague, so I'm not going to draw out that pattern. Let's get a little sense of that pot that's sitting on to the left. Okay, it's quite light in value, so I'm not going to put too much paint on. It's a little bit dark there. And again, let's just now find that structure a little bit more. What I'm not doing, I'm not just redrawing my yellow. Okay, don't just redraw where your yellow is. What I'd look at is trying to make your yellow composition just that little bit better. Okay, so your yellow underpainting, or that light colour you start, is the starting point. What I'm trying to do now is to make my yellow drawing that little bit better. So sometimes if the clarification stage, which you could argue is what I'm doing now, as I'm clarifying my drawing, I'm trying to make it that little bit better. So don't just see your yellow as the perfect outline. It won't be. You'll know you'll need to shift it and move it around accordingly. Okay? So make sure you give yourself permission to do that. Let's then give a quick suggestion of some of these apples there, which I'm going to make a little bit larger. Now, because we're working with oil, of course we have that complete freedom that if we do need to move things around, you can move things around. So let's just say that you didn't like this, you can just rub it out with a piece of kitchen paper, and you can put it in the place where it needs to be as well. So it's very, very flexible and very forgiving. And maybe we'll just put a little something there. See, I'm just making that up. I'm just seeing if that helps the rhythm of the composition. We've got a little shape that's going there. And let's just quickly finish off what we've got over here. We've got our fabric, which is disappearing and starting to tumble off the table. This is becoming darker. And let's just give a hint of those cherries, our little reward at the end of our painting. We've got a couple of little things taking place there. I don't really want to do too much more than that. Now what I'm aware of, there's a fruit over there, is I've got this absent space at the back. Okay, now this absent space at the back isn't absent. I can see more of the backdrop actually going into the chateau building as well. So am I going to paint a grand piano and some shutters over there? I have to ask myself, what is the point of this painting? Is it about the building, or is it about a moment on the table? Okay, so for me, what I want to try and get across, of course, is the chateau. So what I'm going to, the still life. So what I'm going to do is just allow it to melt away. Okay, so just put a nice middle value ground on it. Now, of course, when Cezanne was doing this, he would have left it blank at this early stage, and then he would have added a tone on it with his strong directional brushstrokes a little bit later. Now, I will put some of those strong structural brushstrokes on later, but for the moment, what I've just created is that sense of a plan, a sense of a design, which has helped me visualise where my brushstrokes go in terms of putting in and placing up this rather complex scene. And it doesn't feel quite as complex anymore. It still feels like a tricky puzzle, but now I feel like I've got something to work with. I've got something to play with, and I can start moving shapes around to try and get the best of that scene that's in front of me. A little bit dark. I'm just going to strengthen my dark down here. So it's a quick compositional sketch. It's also a tonal sketch. It's a tonal study. And in a very relatively short period of time, I can now sort of lean back and ask myself, is it working? Do I feel like I'm happy with it? Is it hitting all the boxes in terms of the layout, its composition, and so on? One thing I'm going to do is the cloth that sort of disappears at the top of the table, I feel I don't quite like that angle. I'm just going to sort of get rid of that and change the angle a little bit. You see that's just sort of pulling it in slightly differently as well. So again, you have freedom and the absolute opportunity to play and to move your shapes around. I'm going to go a tiny bit darker just at the back behind this pot. And, you know, Is it a coincidence that the colour I'm choosing over here is the same colour as that mahogany coloured piano over there? It's not a coincidence at all. So I'm stealing the colour that is around, which is going to give the painting a sense of unity and, you know, identity of where we are painting it as well. Let's take some of that darkness over there. So that's my initial design and concept for the painting. Everything else now is starting to build it up like we were doing in our previous paintings. Okay, so once you've drawn up the composition of your landscapes that we've been doing these last few days, I'd say, right, we start blocking in our main shapes. Now I'm working representationally, i.e. I'm going to try and paint the colours as I see them. However, like the exercise we did yesterday, if you want to go higher in saturation, you could do that. But if you want to go lower in saturation, so you're using more white and you're using the complementary colours to cancel out, that's perfectly fine as well. Remember, if you're clever with your limited use of colours, like the analogous colours and the tertiary colours, it will enhance that sense of unity as well. That also might simplify it. You noticed yesterday how much quicker you were with your painting because you limited and simplified your colour palette. That could also help with this as well. So if you struggle with colour, maybe limit your use of colour, and that might make this process just a little more easier. However, if you want to go full colour, that's fantastic. But bear in mind that you don't make your life so complicated that you're painting every single colour available on the table. Look for a smaller area and a smaller moment. So the next stage I'm going to do for the painting is start blocking in some of those main colours. How are we doing for time?
Great, you're at 21 minutes.
So I go a bit longer? Do you want to see me block in some
Yes,
colours?
please.
Yeah,
Yes,
okay.
please.
I'll block in a little bit of colour. So let's put in some of the colour, and then I'm actually going to see. So let's put in that green at the top. So I'm not going to use as much thinner anymore. Okay, I'm not going to use as much thinner. This is as much as thin the painting is going to go in terms of the solvent. I'm not going to use any extra. So I can start showing now some of the way that Cezanne started to lay down his paint. I'm going to lift up my palette now, so I need to start having to see what it looks like. And we'll start laying down some of these marks. Okay, so there's a decent, it's sort of a medium amount of paint on the brush. It's not fat, which means it's not laden with a thick blob of paint. It's sort of in that middle ground. And we're going to start working in planes. Now, what's a plane? A plane is a strong linear brushstroke. Okay, it's a thick rectangular line. And as I'm laying each mark down, I'm very conscious to leave that mark where it is.
Is this Cézanne then, as opposed to Scumbling?
Correct. This would be it's a Cezanne direct approach of painting, and what it has is a very sure quality of mark as it's laid down. So let me build this up a little bit, and then I'll show you an example of what it isn't, because sometimes it's always interesting to see what the opposite is. These straps are not behaving,
Yes.
are they?
You've got to remember.
I keep wiggling around too much. Now, how I interpret this way of painting is I see and think of every mark I am laying down a little bit like a mosaic tile, okay, like a very direct, specific shape. And it's back to that thing, paint shapes, not things. I'm not painting a thing, I'm just painting the shapes that I can see within, in this case, this beautiful green pot. And every stroke I'm laying down is following, you see, it's following the vessel, it's following the shape of the vessel. You know, I'm not going left or right. You notice the brush strokes are going down. I was going a little bit left or right just at the bottom, just to cut in where the fabric is. But now as I'm painting the main body of the character of this beautiful vessel, I'm following the plane, I'm following its structure as I move down. Okay, so every brush stroke has a real assurance, a sense of identity and purpose as it's being laid.
How are you thinking about the light on the vase, Peter?
So, bizarrely, I'm not really thinking much in terms of light at the moment. I'm aware that every brushstroke I lay down is both has a sense of value, has a sense of lightness and darkness. When I slightly lean back and slightly half close my eyes, I'm noticing that this bottom right-hand section of the pot is darker. So down in this area, it is inevitably darker. So I'm aware of that light then, and I'm aware that it goes slightly lighter as it moves towards that top left-hand side, hence why there's slightly more pale there. So I am being open and receptive to that, but not so much that it's completely dictating everything. And that's an interesting quality of the way Cezanne was painting. Some of his paintings can, on occasions, look a little flat, and that's because he wasn't a tonalist. And tonalists are those artists that really focus on values of highlights, midtones and shadows. He was aware of it, of course, and he was making his colours light and dark, but he was much more interested about the form and the structure and the shape of a particular object, and indeed the colour of that particular object. That's what really kind of led the painting, as opposed to making something look ultimately three-dimensional, because some of his paintings really do not look that. And remember, that's one of the controversial ways that the Impressionists were painting. They weren't led by tonalism and representationalism, which was what was so prominent in the Paris Salon and what was considered good, high art. He was approaching this genre in a completely different sense. So very structured.
So no scumbling?
No scumbling. No, he wasn't really a scumbler as Monet was and others. So if I just leave that for a second, because I'll paint more, but I want to show just a couple of examples of the fruit, just so you get an idea of what I'm trying to achieve. And I want to show you an example of ways of painting that I think are what we're going to try and aim for today. And ways of painting, I think we have to be careful we don't fall into the trap of. Let me paint this pear for you, okay? So you've got a pear that's by here, okay? Bit of ochre, bit of yellow. I stole a little bit of the green that's up here. As we go down, I'm following the form, the gorgeous shape of that pear as we go up. Every brush stroke is strong.
And straight?
And straight, yes, absolutely. It has a sort of a directional feel to it. Let's just colour out a little bit more. So can you just pay attention to what happens after I lay my brush stroke down?
You stand back.
I stand back. What else am I doing?
You're not wiping your brush every time.
Not wiping my brush,
Because it's the same colour.
because the same colour in this case. Every brush stroke is different. Every brush stroke has a strong identity. Every brush stroke that I'm laying down, I've considered and I've mixed together. Yeah? Every brush stroke has a sense of identity. Okay, so I've got a very structural pair. Let me show you how I'm not painting, okay? Can you just now notice the difference? I'm going to paint this green apple that's next door to it. Let me just get the right colour of it. So a bit of viridian green, a little bit of the yellow, hint of white. Okay, here's how I'm not painting this apple.
You've got the look.
What do we call that? We call that
Licking.
licking. I'm not licking that, okay? Let me show you how I'm not painting it.
Got a bit of foot in the air as well. Your tippy too.
I'm not painting it like that. I'm not doing... Okay, you're familiar with that sound, because that's the way I was painting yesterday. I'm not doing that, am I? Oh, it's turned into another pair. I wasn't doing that. Let me just wipe that little section off there. Okay. So if we just look at that, which of those two shapes, this one or this one, looks more three-dimensional? Okay. This one has more structure, it looks like more three-dimensional. I've been aware of the light bits and dark bits. This bit looks flat, okay? It's flat not just because it's one value, one sort of flat colour. It's flat because it looks flat. There's not a lot of paint on, and it just looks very devoid of direction. So can you now just compare the difference? Here we go, I'm going to slightly compare the difference. How am I holding my brush? At a length. Where am I standing?
Far away.
I'm standing back. Why is that important?
You can see it.
I can see what I'm looking at. Can I see my still life if I'm doing that? I have to go. Yeah. Okay, so I'm stood here. When I'm stood here, I can see what I'm trying to achieve. Okay. How are my marks being laid down?
Positive.
With oomph, with power, with
Direction.
direction. Thank you. Sculpting. I'm sculpting an apple. I'm not painting an apple. I'm sculpting the shape of that apple. It's a much better, in my mind, what we're achieving. And this is how Cezanne would have approached his paintings in a much more, you could argue, visceral manner. Let's get a little bit of darkness under there. And so we need to continue. Now, have you noticed how many brushes I have in my hands? Okay, this is just going to keep me nice and clean from going from colour to colour, because I'm going to paint just a soft, before we finish, I'm going to just paint a quick, soft little reddish apple. I'm using the crimson, a little bit of yellow, just to give me that lovely cadmium reddy sort of colour, although you can use your lighter reds as well. Where have we got? So it's sort of here. Now, if you just look at the fruit that I'm painting, and you see this area has transitioned through 3 different sort of stages. What was the very first stage of that area of fruit?
It was shape.
It was just one huge connected shape, wasn't it? It wasn't individual circles, it was just one large joined up area, number 1. Then number 2, I gave a little bit of clarity of the darker paint, just so I knew where I was going, yeah? And now this is the 3rd iteration. Okay, so it's gone through a series of different stages to get to this point. So what I've essentially drawn is, this is now the 3rd time I've drawn this apple I'm painting at the moment. It's gone through 3 different stages of construction and painting. It's not just getting it done once right first time. It goes through a developmental process, bit by bit, that's nice and kind. Like that. And then we move on to the other one. And it's a little bit like I was saying, it's back to that sort of jigsaw mosaic approach. You do your first tile, and then once you've blocked it in, you're going to move on to your next one. Okay, and very kind of relatively quickly, it starts to kind of structure in. But it all started with how we start that foundation, which is, what's the concept? Okay, which bit of this are you going to do? You can't paint it all, so it's the simplification. What are you going to leave out? That's the first thing. Which bit you're going to do, therefore what you're going to leave out. Once you've done that, what's the format? Is it going to be portrait mode or landscape mode? What's the rhythm and the direction through the painting? Does it go up or down? Does it go left or right? Top left to bottom right, or bottom right to bottom left, top left, and so on. So think about that direction and rhythm through the painting. Once you've done that, just start finding it in a light sketch, maybe in your sketchbook. Just check it, just to see if it works visually in a thumbnail in your sketchbook. Draw it once, twice, 3 times maybe, move from there to see if it's any better. Once you've done that, you think, yes, I can see that as a concept that I can visualise, then start to visualise it very lightly as a sketch. In this case, I use yellow, you could use a pale different colour, and just find it and see if it works on that scale. Move your fruit, take something away, add something in if you think it will improve it. Once that concept has been visually laid out, then you can start giving a bit of a tonal study. So I just washed in very lightly where some of the darker sections were, just so I got an idea of the lighter bits and the darker bits. When I felt that was there, that's my plan sort of outlined, and I can then start sculpting with these lovely shapes and forms with the paint. Not scumbling, not being feathy, but being mediumly generous with the paint, making every stroke count, not seeing it as almost a three-dimensional thing, but seeing it as these lovely flat, cardboardy sort of shaped stones that you're trying to convey, trying to find the true colour of the object, and then very slowly we'll build up this very direct aesthetic, which was painted for the first time back in the mid-1800s, early 1900s, that Cézanne gifted us this way of painting. So, what your challenge now is, and if you're going to be painting along at home, is decide which area, which composition you'd like to do. If you need to move a little bit around the table, that's fine, but be aware that when you move one apple, it might completely compromise the composition for someone else. So only on exceptional cases are you allowed to move anything on the table without consulting almost everybody looking at it. So do be very, very careful of that. But once you've chosen your focal area, your focal point, we're going to start building up these paintings.
Very exciting.
Peter, would it make sense to take a picture of what we want to paint as opposed to everybody moving their easels around?
As in working from, as in work from photograph instead of from life?
Yeah.
I think we have a wonderful opportunity to work from life today,
Yeah.
which in normal circumstances we wouldn't usually get to do. And I think it's a treat to be able to work from life. It's also a hard challenge to work from life. And I think when we challenge ourselves, we stretch and we learn, and there's potential to get better. And working from life, of course, is how Cézanne would have worked. So if you want to really experience that true nature, then I would recommend giving it a go from life. But I'm going to give you your safety net, and your safety net is, at the end of today, you're going to photograph the setup, and we have the luxury of the next 3 days to look back at our picture, and we can then develop it a little bit further from photography if we need to. Okay, so you do have that flexibility. It's not all going to be life, and there's absolutely no expectation from me that you're going to finish this by today. But like the paintings we've done thus far, you're going to make a solid start. And if you could do that solid start from life, you'll be doing yourself a great favour in learning and, of course, experiencing that true impressionistic approach that these artists undertook. Does that make sense?
Carry on painting our still life and my paintings when we get home forever.
Quite.
Is it all day we've got to?
You're here all day. So you've got essentially 2 sessions. You've got the morning session, you've got the afternoon session, lots of breaks. I'm going to be walking around constantly, checking in with you. And after lunch, I'm going to do a bit more to this, just to show you how you take it on that little bit further when we're all about there. And I'll be logging on live stream. Yeah, I'll be logging on live stream as well. So if you're painting along at home, I'll show you the next stages that we take this painting that little bit further. Right. Yes, question?
Do we use more than 3 paintbrushes?
You can use as many paintbrushes as you like.
Okay.
Bear in mind you've got to clean them all at the end of the day, but yeah, I'll end up probably using 6, 8 brushes in this picture, I imagine. By the way, if you're working here in the Chateau, the scale of your canvas, now I've worked on this scale, it won't be any bigger than this. I don't want to inflict this scale on you. If you would like to work a little smaller, that is fine, I do respect that. There are some smaller canvases and canvas boards in the studio. If you think that you'd like to work on something smaller, that's fine. You can go over and get a slightly smaller canvas or canvas board if you would prefer. However, if you want to work on this scale, there are a load of canvases just in the room there. But this would work on any scale. If you are, by the way, going to work smaller, you probably would, of course, would need to work in the same approach, just as direct, just as bold, but maybe your brushes just would be more in the number size 2s to 4s, whereas I was using kind of 4s, 6s and 8s, just to give you that bigger scale. The brushes I was choosing fitted the scale of my painting. If I did this with a number 2, it would have taken me for ages, yeah? But if I did it with a number 12, it would probably obliterate it a bit too much. So find the right brush size that suits the scale that you're working on. All right, off you go. Right, if you wish to photograph the painting, please do. You're very welcome to do so. If I get it
That's really interesting. You enjoyed that? You've got to strap him in like
Strap me in, baby.
Okay.
that poor baby who was
Now, do you want it
smothered
tied
by
like that, or do you want to bring it around?
I usually like bringing. Oh, that feels so much.
Is that better?
Yeah. What was?
Okay, it was just twisted.
It wasn't tight around, but you'll slip on it. You thought
Ah!
you worked hard and invertible.
Okay.
That feels
Okay,
great.
is that good?
Thank you.
Okay.
You can dress me every morning.
So you've got the camera free for a while.
Yeah, go on. Go raw.
It's like too many cherries.
Quick, count the cherries, everyone. Count the cherries.
It's possible
Well, at least I have used a canvas this size.
I might move my easel out of the way so it leaves a bit more of a space for somebody. I'll slide back a bit.